The day the aliens came, humanity believed it was ready for anything. They were wrong. For decades, scientists had pointed radio dishes at the stars, hoping to hear something, anything, that proved they were not alone. Writers had imagined first contact in 1,000 different ways. Some thought aliens would be friends. Others feared they would be enemies. But nobody truly understood what it meant to be small in a galaxy full of giants. The Dominion arrived on a Tuesday morning in the year 2147. Their ships blocked out the sun over every major city on Earth. Each vessel was the size of a mountain, smooth and silver, humming with power that made human technology look like children's toys. The people of Earth watched these ships descend through their atmosphere and felt something they had never felt before. They felt truly helpless. World leaders sent messages of peace. They offered friendship, trade, cultural exchange. They did not respond to these messages. They simply waited in the sky for 3 days, scanning everything below them, learning, studying, deciding. On the 4th day, they attacked. Human missiles could not scratch the hulls of ships. Human jets fell from the sky like insects swatted by a careless hand. Nuclear weapons, the most terrible things humanity had ever created, did nothing but make pretty lights against alien shields. They were not cruel about it. They were efficient. They destroyed military bases, government buildings, and communication centers with surgical precision. They killed only as many humans as necessary to make their point clear. Resistance was impossible. Submission was the only option. Within 11 days, Earth belonged to the Dominion. Within a month, the first transport ships began loading human cargo. They had not come to destroy humanity. They had come to collect it. Across their vast empire, the Dominion always needed workers. Small workers, clever workers, disposable workers. Humans fit these needs perfectly. They gave humanity a number. Species 4891. Not a name, just a number in a long list of conquered peoples. They had done this many times before. They were very good at it. The years that followed were dark beyond description. Humans were scattered across 100 worlds, separated from their families, their cultures, their histories. They worked in places no would go. Deep mines on frozen moons. Chemical plants that leaked poison into the air. Maintenance tunnels so tight that only small bodies could fit inside them. They died by the thousands, by the millions, but humans kept being born and the Dominion kept putting them to work. That was simply how things were. Was born on a mining moon called 7, 52 years after the conquest. She never saw Earth. She never knew blue skies or green forests or oceans that stretched to the horizon. She knew only gray rock, recycled air, and the endless darkness of the deep tunnels. Her mother died in a cave collapse when was 7. Her father was transferred to another world when she was 12. She never saw him again. These things happen to humans all the time. Learn not to cry about them. Tears changed nothing. She grew up strong and smart. She had to be. The weak and the stupid did not survive long in the mines. By the time she was 20, was a shift leader responsible for a team of 40 human workers. She kept them alive. She kept them productive. She kept the overseers satisfied. But she never stopped thinking. She never stopped wondering if this was all there would ever be. The discovery happened by accident, as such things often do. A tunnel collapse killed 3 of her workers and revealed a cavern that should not exist. The maps showed solid rock where the cavern now opened. Sent her team back to the main shaft and went to investigate alone. She did not know why. She simply felt that she had to see. What she found changed everything. The ship was ancient. Dust covered every surface and strange growths clung to its hull. It had been buried here for ages beyond counting, hidden deep in the moon's crust where no one would ever think to look. The vessel was small compared to ships, maybe the size of a large house, but something about it felt different. It felt important. Spent hours finding a way inside. The airlock still worked somehow. The interior was dark and cold, but her helmet lights showed her wonders. control panels covered in symbols she could not read, machines that hummed with faint power despite their age, and in what seemed to be a laboratory, crystals that glowed with soft blue light. She touched one of the crystals. Information flooded her mind. It was not language as she understood it. It was knowledge, pure and direct, concepts and equations and principles that bypassed words entirely. She saw things that humans had never imagined. She understood things that they themselves had never discovered. The beings who built this ship had mastered dimensional folding. They could step outside of normal space, exist in the gaps between reality, travel distances that should have taken years in mere moments. Their technology made faster-than-light drives look primitive. It made everything look primitive. Fell to her knees, overwhelmed. Then she began to laugh. Then she began to cry. Then she began to plan. She told no one about the ship, not yet. She sealed the collapsed tunnel and reported it as unsafe. She marked it off the maps. She waited. Over the following weeks, she watched her fellow workers. She listened to their conversations. She identified the ones who still had fire in their eyes, the ones who had not yet surrendered completely to their fate. One by one, she approached them. One by one, she brought them to the hidden ship. A physicist named Wei was the first. He wept when he saw the dimensional equations. He said they were beautiful. An engineer named was the second. He ran his hands over the ancient machines and whispered that he could make them work again. A doctor named was the third. She studied the biological data stored in the ship's computers and said that humans could be so much more than they were. Others followed, slowly, carefully built a network of believers. They met in secret in the deep tunnels where no overseer ever went. They studied the ancient technology. They learned its principles. They dreamed of impossible things. 20 years passed. 20 years of working double shifts to cover their secret activities. 20 years of hiding their knowledge, their hope, their growing capabilities. 20 years of watching friends and family suffer and die while they prepared for something none of them might live to see. They built nothing during those years. That was the hardest part. The temptation to construct even a small device to prove that the technology worked was almost unbearable, but insisted. Any device could be detected. Any anomaly could bring investigators. They could not risk everything on impatience. Instead, they learned. They memorized. They passed their knowledge to trusted children who would grow up and pass it to their own children. They created a chain of understanding that could not be broken. And they spread. Humans from Seven were sometimes transferred to other worlds, made sure her people were among them. They carried the knowledge with them, hidden in their minds where no scan could detect it. They found other humans with fire in their eyes. They recruited. They taught. By the time was 70 years old, the network existed on 17 different worlds. Thousands of humans shared the secret. They waited for her signal. The day came without warning. Inspectors arrived at 7, conducting a routine survey. One of them noticed a discrepancy in the mining records. A tunnel marked as collapsed and unsafe showed signs of recent activity. Received the warning just in time. She sent the signal. On 17 worlds, humans stopped what they were doing. They gathered in prearranged locations. They held hands or touched shoulders or simply stood close together. And then, following procedures they had memorized years ago, they activated the dimensional shifts. Space folded around them, reality bent, and 3 billion humans simply disappeared. They searched for decades. They tore apart mining facilities and habitat blocks. They interrogated other servitor species. They sent ships to scan every corner of the systems where humans had lived. They found nothing. The humans had stepped into the spaces between spaces, the dimensional folds that they could not detect or reach. They had taken everything they needed with them: tools, seeds, medical supplies, records of their history, and most importantly, each other. lived long enough to see her people establish their first permanent settlement in what they called the Threshold. She died at the age of 93, surrounded by free humans, knowing that she had given her species a chance. Her last words were simple: build something worth remembering. The eventually declared species 4,891 extinct. They updated their records, assigned new workers to fill the gaps, and moved on. The galaxy forgot about humanity. That was exactly what humanity wanted. In the Threshold, hidden from all detection, the survivors began the long work of transformation. They had escaped their chains. Now they would make sure they never wore chains again. The Threshold was not a place exactly. It was more like a gap in the fabric of space itself. The ancient beings who had built the buried ship had discovered these gaps and learned to live within them. Now humans would do the same. The first years were hard beyond description. 3 billion people had escaped the Dominion, but they had escaped with almost nothing. Food was scarce. Medicine was scarcer. Shelter consisted of whatever structures they could build from raw materials harvested at the edges of normal space. Many died. Disease swept through crowded settlements. Equipment failed. Accidents claimed lives every day. Some people lost hope and walked into the dimensional barriers, choosing death over struggle. But most did not. Most remembered what they had fled and found strength in that memory. They would not go back to being slaves. They would not give up. They would survive no matter the cost. A council formed to govern the settlements. They called themselves the Remembrance, a name chosen to honor those who had died in slavery and those who had sacrificed to make the escape possible. The council made hard decisions. They rationed food. They prioritized survival over comfort. They established strict rules to prevent the kind of chaos that could destroy their fragile new society. Wei, now an old man, led the effort to understand and improve the dimensional technology. His teams worked constantly, mapping the Threshold, finding new stable zones, developing better ways to harvest resources from normal space without being detected. Equally aged directed construction. His engineers built habitats, power systems, manufacturing facilities. Everything was designed with one goal in mind: efficiency. Nothing could be wasted. Every scrap of material had to serve a purpose. Oversaw the medical programs. Her work was perhaps the most important of all. Humans, she argued, had been conquered because they were weak. Their bodies were fragile. They were short. Their abilities were limited. If they wanted to survive in a hostile galaxy, they would have to change. The biological enhancement programs began within the first decade. Nothing dramatic at first. Stronger immune systems, better radiation resistance, improved healing. Small changes that helped people survive the harsh conditions of the Threshold. But was thinking ahead. She was thinking about generations yet to come. The children born in the Threshold were different from their parents. They grew up in low gravity, breathing recycled air, eating synthetic food. Their bodies adapted, and the medical teams helped those adaptations along. By the third generation, the changes were visible. Threshold humans were stronger than their ancestors. They could survive in vacuum for several minutes. They could process toxins that would kill unmodified humans. Their reflexes were faster. Their minds were sharper. They were still human, still recognizable, but they were becoming something more. The Remembrance Council debated these changes endlessly. Some argued they were losing their humanity, becoming something alien. Others said humanity had always been about adaptation, about changing to meet new challenges. In the end, the people themselves decided. Given the choice between remaining vulnerable and becoming strong, they chose strength. The fourth generation brought the first major military programs. Until then, the Threshold humans had focused entirely on survival. They had built no weapons, trained no soldiers, made no plans for conflict. But survivors of the Dominion remembered what it was like to face an enemy they could not fight. They remembered helplessness. They never wanted to feel that way again. Commander established the first training academies. She had been a child when the escape happened, had grown up hearing stories of Earth's conquest. She swore that if humanity ever faced such an enemy again, they would be ready. Her training programs were brutal by old Earth standards. Every human learned basic combat. Every human learned survival skills. Every human learned to operate at least one type of spacecraft. There were no exceptions. The young, the old, the sick, the healthy, everyone contributed according to their abilities. But understood something important. Strength alone would not be enough. The had been strong. The Dominion had millions of ships, billions of soldiers, resources beyond counting. Humanity could never match them in raw numbers. They would have to be smarter. They would have to be better. So the academies taught strategy as well as tactics. They taught science as well as warfare. They taught diplomacy as well as combat. A threshold human would be able to fight, yes, but they would also be able to think, to build, to negotiate, to adapt to any situation. Generations passed. The threshold expanded. New settlements spread through the dimensional gaps, each one a self-sufficient community capable of surviving alone if necessary. The population grew. Technology improved. The enhancements became more sophisticated. 200 years after the escape, a threshold human could survive conditions that would kill any other known species. They could go without food for weeks, without water for days, without air for hours. They could heal from wounds that would be fatal to their ancestors. They could think faster, learn faster, react faster. And they had not forgotten why they were doing this. The history keepers were established in the first century of the threshold. Their job was simple but essential, to record everything, every story of slavery, every name of someone who died in the mines, every detail of the conquest of Earth. Future generations would know exactly what had been done to their ancestors. The history keepers also studied the Dominion. Through carefully hidden probes that slipped in and out of normal space, they observed activities. They mapped Dominion territory. They tracked military movements. They identified weaknesses. They learned that they were not alone in the galaxy. Other species existed, some nearly as powerful as the Dominion. These species competed for resources, fought wars, formed alliances. The political landscape was complex and constantly shifting. They also learned that they had many enemies, species they had conquered and enslaved, species they had tried to conquer and failed, species that feared them and wanted them weakened. Humanity was not unique in its hatred of the Dominion. They were simply more patient. 300 years after the escape, the Council began serious planning for emergence. Not revenge, they insisted. Not conquest. Something more permanent. Something that would ensure no species ever suffered what humanity had suffered. Commander, 7 generations removed from, led the planning committee. He had her eyes, people said, the same fire, the same patience, the same absolute determination. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Humanity would not attack the Dominion's borders where they would be expected. They would strike at the heart. They would disable the systems that let them coordinate their empire. They would free the other servitor species. They would offer an alternative to Dominion rule. And they would do it all in a single, overwhelming blow. The shipyards worked for 50 years, building the emergence fleet. 12,000 capital ships, 400,000 support vessels, 80 million soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Every ship was better than anything the Dominion had. Every weapon was more powerful. Every system was more advanced. 4 centuries of focused development had paid off. On the day of emergence, stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Remembrance, named for the council that had governed humanity through its darkest years, named for the duty they all carried. He thought of whose courage had started everything. He thought of, and who had built the foundations. He thought of who had prepared them for war. He thought of countless others whose names filled the history keeper's records. He thought of Earth, which most of his people had never seen but all of them remembered. "All fleets report ready," his tactical officer said. "Threshold gates are aligned." Took a deep breath. Humanity had been slaves. They had hidden in the darkness for 400 years. They had transformed themselves into something new. Now they would show the galaxy what they had become. "Begin the emergence," he said. Space folded, reality bent, and humanity returned to the stars. The Dominion had grown soft. That was what thought as he watched his fleet tear through their defenses like paper. 4 centuries of uncontested power had made them careless. They had no enemies capable of threatening them. Their military existed to suppress rebellions, not fight wars. Their technology had advanced, yes, but slowly, without urgency. Why rush when you had no competition? Humanity had spent every moment of those 4 centuries preparing for exactly this. The emergence happened simultaneously across 17 star systems. One moment, space was empty. The next moment, hundreds of human ships filled the void, their weapons already firing. The dimensional fold technology let them bypass every defensive position, every sensor network, every early warning system. They simply appeared where they wanted to be. The first targets were communication stations. The Dominion used faster-than-light relays to coordinate their empire, passing information from system to system in minutes rather than years. Human strike teams destroyed these relays in the opening seconds of the attack. Suddenly, they could not talk to each other. Commanders could not contact headquarters. Fleets could not receive orders. The empire that had ruled 1,000 worlds was blind and deaf. The second targets were fleet coordination centers. Without these facilities, ships could not organize effective responses. They fought as individual vessels, not unified forces. Human ships, linked through dimensional communications that they could not detect or jam, coordinated perfectly. It was not even a fair fight. Watched from the remembrance as human ships dismantled a battle group twice their size. His people moved like dancers, every ship knowing exactly where every other ship was, exactly what they were doing. They stumbled around like blind giants, powerful but uncoordinated. "Enemy flagship is requesting surrender," his communications officer reported. "Accept it," said. "Send medical teams to their wounded, treat their crews with respect." This was important. Humanity had not returned for slaughter. They had returned to change things. The broadcast went out on every frequency, in every language the Dominion used. Spoke the words himself, standing before cameras that would carry his image across 1,000 worlds. "People of the Dominion, I am Commander representing the Human Emergence Fleet. 4 centuries ago, your empire conquered my people. You called us species 4,891. You scattered us across your worlds as slaves. You thought we died in the void. We did not die, we survived, we grew, we became something new. But we have not returned for revenge. We have not returned to do to you what you did to us. We have returned to end an age of slavery, not just for humans, for everyone. To the servitor species of the Dominion, you are free. Our ships will help you reach safety. Our settlements will give you shelter. You will never be property again. To the, we do not wish to exterminate you. We wish to live beside you as equals. This is possible, but only if you abandon the practices that made us enemies. No more slavery. No more conquest. No more treating other species as resources to be exploited. The choice is yours. We prefer peace, but we are prepared for war." The message spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Other species heard it and wondered if it was real. Enslaved peoples heard it and dared to hope. They heard it and had to decide what kind of future they wanted. Some chose poorly. The war lasted 3 years. It was not as one-sided as those first battles. They were an old and powerful species. They had resources, technology, and the desperation of an empire fighting for survival. They adapted to human tactics. They developed countermeasures to dimensional fold attacks. They their remaining forces and struck back. But they could not overcome 4 centuries of preparation. Human soldiers fought on 100 worlds, liberating servitor populations, securing strategic positions, cutting supply lines. They were better trained, better equipped, better coordinated than anything that could field, and every freed slave became a potential ally. They were the first to join openly. They had been servitors for 1,000 years, they're long forgotten. When human ships appeared above their labor camps, they rose up and fought beside their liberators. Their knowledge of Dominion systems proved invaluable. The followed, then a dozen other species whose names humanity had never known, all of them eager to throw off their chains. The war became bigger than humanity versus it became the old order versus something new. Coordinated it all from the remembrance. He slept 4 hours a night, 8 meals at his command station, aged 10 years and 3, but he never wavered. This was what his people had prepared for. This was their purpose. The Battle of Prime ended the war. The Dominions was their last stronghold. Every remaining ship, every surviving soldier, every resource they could gather had been concentrated there. The High Council had decided to make their stand where their species had first evolved, where their empire had begun. Humanity gathered the largest fleet ever assembled. Ships from every allied species joined the human vessels. The armada filled space, too vast to count, too powerful to stop. They did not attack immediately, instead sent one final message. We could destroy your world. We have the power. We have, some would say, the right. Your empire enslaved and killed billions of sentient beings across centuries. Justice might demand that you pay for those crimes. But we are not here for justice. We are here for the future. Surrender. Accept the terms of the compact. Your people will live. Your world will remain yours. You will simply no longer rule over others. This is our final offer. You have 1 day to decide. The High Council debated through the night. Some wanted to fight to the last. Others saw the impossibility of victory. In the end, survival won over pride. They surrendered. The compact was signed on the steps of the High Council building, beneath an alien sky that humans had never expected to see. Representatives from 17 species witnessed the ceremony. The document was simple in its core principles. No species would hold another in bondage. No species would conquer another's. Conflicts between species would be resolved through negotiation, with military force used only as a last resort. All signatory species would work together to prevent any single power from dominating the galaxy. It was not a perfect document. There would be violations, disputes, near wars in the centuries to come. But it established something that had never existed before, a framework for coexistence among the stars. Humanity took its place in this new order, not as rulers, not as conquerors. They had proven they could dominate the galaxy if they chose. They chose not to. Instead, they became builders. Human engineers helped rebuild worlds devastated by the war. Human teachers established schools where former servitor species could learn skills to them under the Dominion. Human ships patrolled the borders, not as conquerors but as peacekeepers. And the threshold remained. The dimensional fold technology stayed humanity's secret. Other species knew it existed. New humans could appear and disappear in ways they could not explain, but the details were never shared. Humanity remembered what it was like to be powerless. They would never be powerless again. Retired after the compact was signed, he returned to the threshold, to the oldest human settlement where the history keepers maintained their records. He spent his final years adding to those records, telling the story of the emergence, the war, the peace that followed. He died at the age of 97, surrounded by his family, at peace with what he had accomplished. His great-granddaughter, the second, spoke at his memorial. Commander was not a warrior by nature. He was a scholar, a thinker, a man who would rather build than destroy. But when humanity needed a leader, he led. When we needed strength, he found it within himself and shared it with us all. He often said that our greatest victory was not winning the war. It was deciding what to do after we won. We could have become the new Dominion. We could have ruled through fear as we were once ruled. We chose a different path. My ancestor discovered the technology that freed us. Commander showed us what freedom could mean, not just the absence of chains, the presence of purpose. We are no longer slaves. We are no longer hidden. We are something new under the stars, something that has never existed before. A species that was broken and rebuilt itself. A species that was conquered and became unconquerable. A species that could have chosen vengeance and chose mercy instead. This is who we are now. This is who we will be, forever. The memorial ended. The gathered humans returned to their lives, their work, their families. Across the galaxy, former slaves built new civilizations on free worlds. They adapted to their diminished status, finding new purpose in a galaxy where they were one species among many rather than masters of all. And in the great archives of the Threshold, where humanity kept its memories, a simple inscription marked the entrance. It had been carved there 4 centuries ago, in the earliest days of exile, and it remained as true now as it had been then. We were slaves, we became something else. We will never forget either. Humanity had entered the stars unchained. They had fought for their freedom and won. Now, finally, they could rest. But they would never stop watching. They would never stop preparing. They would never forget what it meant to be helpless. The galaxy had learned to fear the Dominion. Now it would learn something different about humanity. Not fear, respect. And perhaps in time, trust. The stars were wide and full of possibilities. Humanity was ready to explore them all.